Yeah, I need to double check to see if I've got this recording. Yep, I've got a recording. Okay. So here we go. We're going to be talking about, I swear, I feel like I already did this one. Understanding the importance of creating a comprehensive approach to fighting fraud, proactive fraud, auditing, effective organization to minimize fraud, how to eliminate opportunities for fraud, create a culture of honesty, openness, and assistance. Okay. Here, somebody embezzled 600,000. Both the bank and the employee suffered tremendous adverse consequences from the fraud. The employee served prison time and was forced to sell their home and surrender all family retirement savings, pretty normal. Bank lost over $200,000 in unrecovered funds, as well as its reputation in the community and local businesses. Dishonesty cost the victims and perpetrators much more than the $600,000 embezzled. This happens all the time. Um, there was a construction company called H&S Developers. It was part of the Hank Sheckard Group. And after he died, there was a controller who took over, and she was managing a number of Hank Sheckard's little small businesses. His wife, okay, here we go. His wife, his daughters, and his mistress all got portions of his company. Yeah, you heard that right. And so there was something happened and it was right during the big boom of housing. And I guess the company gave away some lots out in the foothills down more towards Ironwood and 14E and 48th Street and 55th Street, somewhere in there. They were key employees were given lots where they could build on, or they could sell it, whatever they wanted to do. And some people sold it. Well, supposedly this is what started with this person. The controller received one of these plot of lands, and they really liked all the excess cash that came into their pocket because they sold their land. Well, they got a little greedy, and they continued to they started embezzling money. I heard $250,000, but then I heard it was in the millions of dollars. So basically the controller, what she was doing was there was Hank Sheckard and his daughters and his wife, they there was multiple businesses there, and so she would go and she would take her own personal purchases and she would charge them to different aspects of the company business, and she actually went to prison. She stole a ton of money from H&S Developers. And this is just here in Yuma. Yuma County treasurer, this is back in the late 80s, early 90s, stole over $100,000. Dave's Welding had their office person 2 years, stole about $200,000, maybe $100,000, $200, $200,000. It's been a while. Southwest Contractors had their accountants steal their credit card and charge a bunch of stuff to the credit card. I can keep going and going and going and just keep going on with all these different frauds that have happened here in Yuma County. It doesn't matter if you have it, they will try to steal it, and you've got to always be on the lookout for the signs and for preventing the fraud. Okay. If you can prevent fraud, you can see here's some of the savings. Just about everyone can be dishonest. I don't like this comment, but it's true. Yeah, I guess everybody can be dishonest. You just got to really hold yourself accountable, and you've got to focus in and always thinking about what would be the right thing to do, regardless of how it will affect you personally. Okay, creating a culture of honesty and openness. Well-defined code of conduct, open door policy, not operating on a crisis basis, hiring honest, qualified employees, providing an employee assistance program, always going in with an attitude of servitude as a boss. An attitude of servitude What can I do to make your life easier? And when you take care of your employees will take care of you. And so here's creating a low fraud environment right here. Benefits of hiring honest people. You don't have to worry about whole things. But here's the deal. Okay, I know I mentioned the church. I know the person who was in that accounting position before this other girl who committed the fraud allegedly was in the position. And she was one of the founding members of the church. They really trusted her with everything. She's very trustworthy, very honest person, very ethical person. Now, when she left, automatically that whole attitude they had towards her, the original, the OG, um, it was placed onto the secondary person, regardless of whether they earned it or not. And so you've always got to go in, no matter who you've got in there. And if you can trust them, with your life or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You've always got to follow your policies and procedures, because at one point that person may not be there. And the person who comes in after them may not be trustworthy. So always keep those policies and procedures and follow them. Keep them in place and follow them, so you don't ever have to think about, well, we shouldn't have trusted her. Well, you have that attitude automatically that you don't. And you go in there and you make sure everything is, again, policies and procedures. 25% of fraud is committed by employees who have worked 3 years or less. Consistent with studies showing that nearly 30% of Americans are dishonest. And then the first step in applicant screening is assessing their resume, making sure that there's true and correct. Following up on their references, making sure those are true and correct. Following up on education, making sure that's true and correct, and letters of recommendation. Okay, so 8 common resume lies: previous work and work experience, skills, college degrees. Look at that. That freaks me out that people would do that, because it's so easy to figure it out. Personal details, high school details, salary information, job specific software and or equipment, skills, employer references. I'm going to tell you these right here, the equipment skills. A lot of people fudge on those, but not totally. I mean, they kind of exaggerate a little bit, but not to the point where it's lying. Okay, consequences of poor hiring. So what's going to end up happening is you're going to find somebody who's not going to be able to do the job. And they're going to lie. Like, remember I told you about that secretary. I mean, I watched her. I can't tell you how many times she would go out and she would be assigned a task, and she would walk over to one of the guys and pretend like she didn't know how to turn on the computer. And the guys would sit there with her and do her work for her. It was ridiculous. And a lot of us got really, really angry with that, because I don't think that's cool. I think people who pretend are not, yeah, they don't make me happy, okay? So I'll just leave it like that. No employer can totally, but you can have like a probationary period. You can observe, you can have somebody that's doing a peer mentoring and watching over them, making sure that they're getting the job done, making sure they understand the job and not just say they do, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. Following fraud preventative practices, that helps you minimize the fraud and bringing in somebody who may commit fraud. If you have this in place, people are going to be less likely to steal from you because they know you're watching. Okay. Verify their application and their resume. Again, if you start talking to somebody and let's say you're calling up and you're verifying references, and somebody doesn't want to tell you anything other than they work there. If I like, okay, for example, I get a lot of phone calls in reference to the FBI and doing background checks on people applying for border patrol or some other type of federal position, which is fine. That's what they're there for. They're supposed to do that. Now, I could have a choice with this. I can choose just to say the bare minimum. Or when I have when I have a former student who I know would be an exceptional candidate for one of these federal positions that they're interviewing for, I say so. I don't just finish with just the point blank. I'll say, yes, I know them. I remember and I will use specific instances where I've seen them work hard at something, and I'll bring that up during the interview process so that they know that this person who's applied is a person of substance. And we should take them seriously, and there's somebody that should be hired. That's that's what I do. Now, if I have somebody that calls me up and I don't really know them, and if I don't know a lot about them, or if I just don't think they'd be a good fit, I just give very point blank answers. I don't elaborate. And if you find that happening, when somebody doesn't elaborate and you ask them to elaborate and they just give you just the bare minimum, um, because see, they can't say anything bad, but they can say above and beyond. If somebody's doing something above and beyond, that's fine. But they just can't say anything bad. So if somebody doesn't have anything good to say, there's probably nothing to be good to be found. Okay, that's my point. Restrictions on resume verification. You gotta have a written authorization from the applicant. You cannot ask about arrest, garnishment history, marital status. Contraception, pregnancy, childbirth, bearing and childcare plans, height, weight, disabilities, nationality, race, or ancestry. Employers should require that all applicants themselves certify that their application information is true and correct. Make sure that they know if there's anything false in there or omitted. It could be grounds for immediate termination. Train those involved in the hiring process to be on the lookout. That's why you have an HR company side, an HR side, so they can go in here and they can look at that. Assess a candidate's credit history, especially if they're working in a financial institution. You're going to want to make sure that they don't have any financial pressures that may cause them to commit any fraud in the future. Okay. Make ethics trainings part of newly hired on board. That's really good. Like I have to do, I have to do it every year with the college. I have to do a FERPA training, sexual harassment training, and an IT training. And I have to do it every single year to make sure that we can hopefully eliminate any future, specifically it's IT, trying to stop people from stealing our data. But anyhow, it's kind of the purpose of that. Creating a positive work environment. Consequences of unacceptable behavior. And here's a discussion one. Company A is trying to reduce employee fraud. Given the following description of the company's culture, discuss changes Company A could make to create a positive low fraud environment. Company A provides excellent pay, plenty of opportunity for promotion. They have strict rules for employee ethics and tough no tolerance policy for any behavior considered by management to be dishonest. Company A's managers have absolute authority in interpreting corporate policy. If a manager suspects one of their subordinates of dishonest behavior, they can recommend the employee be terminated immediately. Okay, well, what's the discussion? Okay. How could they, by reducing the rigidity of their ethics rules, increase transparency? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They could have a more specific. Here we go. Let's see. It's my debrief. Creating a culture of honesty, openness, and assistance. So hire honest people, create a positive work environment, provide an employee assistance program. So assistant programs, they could be like, maybe extra sick leave, like people can donate sick leave to an employee, like, like, I don't have any vacation leave or anything like that. I only have sick leave, but I don't donate it because, it's a weird part of my benefit program. I have like 400 hours. Of course, I've been here for, well over 10 years, 13, I think, years. And, if for some reason I thought there was a coworker of mine that needed sick leave, I might volunteer some of my hours, give them some of my hours. But for the most part, I don't do that because I don't get vacation leave because our contract is only 9 months out of the year. So I don't ever think about my sick leave. I'll probably leave a bunch on the table when I leave in 10 years or so. Find methods of eliminating fraud, having good internal controls, discouraging collusion between employees, customers, or vendors, monitoring employees and providing a hotline for anonymous tips, creating an expectation of punishment, conducting proactive auditing. This is everything we just heard about in the previous chapter. Okay, so the internal control framework includes your control environment, your risk assessment, set of control activities, information and communication systems. So the control environment, let's see what that looks like. Okay, we're gonna assess the risk. You know, I don't like segregation of duties. I like cross training, but I don't like segregation of, I shouldn't say that. I do like segregation of duty. I don't like when you go and you cross train and you move employees around into different areas. Like if I've got somebody who's really good at accounts payable, I'm gonna leave them at accounts payable, but I am gonna cross train my accounts receivable with my accounts payable person, or my bookkeeping person with my general ledger person. I'm gonna cross train people back and forth. That's just kind of just what I'm gonna do. Instead of moving them around, because I don't think that's a good thing. Once you got somebody who knows what they're doing, you leave them in that position. But you cross train people so that you don't ever come across that situation where you're having to tell somebody they have to take a vacation because the little old lady won't leave. So there's some of the controls, effective control systems. Good accounting system provides timely, valid, complete information. Physical control of assets. You never ever have accounting in charge of your fixed assets. Usually that goes to IT. But you don't want to do that because theoretically, if I'm in control of the fixed assets, I could write off the fixed asset, take it home, and you guys wouldn't be the wiser. Proper authorizations, make sure you've got people at certain levels of authority signing, and that you follow through with your policies and procedures, segregation of duties, independent checks, and your proper documentation. For each of the following scenarios, which control activity would be most appropriate? The quality testing department of Company B is responsible for determining if received products from vendors are acceptable. Submission of an report or product acceptance. I don't like that "and" there. Automatically triggers payment to the vendor. No. Company C calibrates and refurbishes precision hand tools that are currently in high demand in private resale method. Okay, which of these would be most effective? I would never, ever have an automatically triggering payment because theoretically I could create ghost vendors. And I just put my reports in and it's gonna trigger the payment and nobody's double checking me. So I wouldn't ever do that. I would track these in inventory. That's what I would do. Okay. Okay, safeguards should be able to prevent theft of calibrated. So again, I would track them in inventory. Okay, so we got preventative and we've got detective controls, segregation of duties, system of authorizations, physical safeguards, and the Detective is independent checks, documents, and records, okay? With your documents and records, you never ever want to throw out any of your voided checks. You want to keep those. Because when the auditor comes in, they're gonna double check those voided checks to see if you have them and to make sure they didn't clear the bank at some weird amount, okay? So you're gonna want to make sure that your invoices are all pre-written on your documentation. You don't want your computer to do it. You want it to be pre-numbered on your, any of your vendor, well, you don't care about your vendor invoices, but on your purchase orders, your requisition request, and your customer invoicing. I know my voice is sounding awful and I still have 2 more of these videos to do after this. Discouraging collusion. Okay, when you have collusion, you're gonna have a huge loss, okay? Collusive fraud is slower to develop than individual fraud because you're gonna have more than one person involved. It could be people accepting bribes and kickbacks. Theoretically, let's say that I go and I contract with ABC Supply. And I tell my buddy over there, okay, so I'm the procurement person. I say, look, I'll buy only from ABC Supply if you bump the prices up by 20%, and then you keep 10%, and then you kick back 10% to me. So now I'm gonna end up paying more for these supplies, but I'm also getting a kickback from the company, and so is my buddy. That's not a good thing. Okay, so that's an example. Monitor your employees. If you have people who are borrowing money all the time, that's a problem. If you have somebody who's living outside of their means, that's a problem. If you have somebody who's got an alcohol or drug abuse problem, that's a problem. Okay, those are all red flags of somebody who may potentially commit fraud in the future. Okay. Elements of effective whistleblowing, making sure it's anonymous, making sure there's independence, making sure that it's not somebody up in upper management that's going to be, oh, look, they're complaining about Bob. Let's just ignore that. You know, Bob's a good guy. No, you want it to go to an external party to review and report. Okay. Making sure that you follow up, making sure that there's people that's investigating. Okay. Making sure it's understood that if you commit some type of fraud, there will be a punishment involved. Conducting proactive fraud auditing. That's just internal auditing, okay? You should always be reviewing and auditing and double checking and making sure that nothing is under par, okay? It needs to be up to par, not under par. Okay, you just always double checking. That's what an internal auditor is supposed to be doing. And so here's the summary. And here's an approach to fighting fraud. No, you don't, it all depends. Some companies have an internal auditor or have an internal auditing department. And they go in there and they double check. You shouldn't have, unless you're big enough to have your own internal auditor, you should always have your fellow employees double checking your fellow employees. Okay, I know that sounds awful. It puts a lot of pressure on everybody, but it holds everybody accountable. Okay, so my accounts payable could be double checking my accounts receivable. My fixed asset could be double checking my general ledger. My accounts payable could be double checking my person doing bank reconciliation, or my CEO could be double checking the bank reconciliation, always double checking. Okay. Let's see, Company Q recently learned that 10% of its gross revenues were being lost to employee fraud. That's higher than 5%. Company Q has no fraud mitigation program in place and assigns you to be the new full-time fraud mitigation officer of your company. For each of the elements below, list an effective fraud fighting activity in the company department best suited to perform it. Fraud prevention. Well, who's gonna be doing my fraud prevention? Who's gonna be doing my fraud detection? My fraud prevention, I think one, it's gonna start with, my upper level management team. And I'm gonna double check and make sure I've got policies and procedures in place to, prevent fraud. And then fraud detection, that's gonna be my investigation, and I'm probably gonna have a list of activities where, at least once a month, we're gonna be reviewing somebody else's work and double checking it. That's just what you should be doing. Okay, here's the current model. Fraud incident, you investigate the action and resolution. Okay, here's the current model. Fraud incident occurs, security and internal audit departments investigate. Company decides what action to take regarding the perpetrator. They close the case files, reduce employees, implement new controls. Stages are repeated for each new fraud occurrence. You know what? Why are we being reactive instead of proactive? Be proactive, put your fraud procedures in place so that you can prevent the fraud. Okay, here's tone at the top, educating, so on all the way through. Important takeaways. Every organization will have some fraud. That's very true. Amount of fraud in an organization depends on the education and training, your attitude as your managers, your risk assessment, internal controls, tone at the top, proactive fraud detection programs that it has in place, how it investigates and follows up on frauds that do occur. And here's a self-assessment. And then there's my summary. And if I do this. Okay. Let me stop sharing. I come out of here and I'm going to see you guys in chapter 5.